Hello.
Hello. Good to see you. Yay.
Mm,
Please take the time to see everyone here if you can and want to. It's nice to check in visually, at least. Wow. Such a treat.
mm. Good to see you all.
Yeah. Mm. Hope that you're all doing well. Mm. So we're going to begin with just kind of finding an attunement to the space around your body. It, it can be a little wide or just right next to your skin, however you find it helpful to start being more aware of your body, but without pressure. And we'll start with just noticing if the attention is cold or having trouble connecting, or if there can be, you can call up even a little bit of kindness or just quiet tenderness, something very quiet. It doesn't have to be intense at all. A quiet care. And then let the attention go wherever it's naturally drawn, anywhere within your body. And just see if there can be again that light, quiet, even a few moments, quiet kindness or tenderness, quiet. It's like you're not trying too hard. Then you might notice that it might be that your attention is drawn to a smaller area like your hands. Then you notice, if you can, if the attention is receptive, if there's a way that the attention can shift from that kindness, tenderness to being with just what is happening moment by moment. So that there is a way the attention at times is receiving directly the truth, just what's unfolding. You might notice the visual image of your hands, or your hands connected to your arms or body. And you let that happen whenever it happens. You just notice seeing. And then you see if you can shift into the sensing directly through the sense door of touch. And again, this is often quiet and very light. Like a butterfly landing on a few leaves or flowers, and maybe gently immersing the attention more deeply into the hands. And we can shift the attention then into that receiving of the breath. It can be very light, again, like a butterfly landing and touching. Or a feeling at times of being underwater, like immersed inside. The visual images will come and go, memories of experiences of visual images and breath in the past. And so you just see that as remembering or thinking happening in the present moment. And you see if the attention can drop into this flow. It's a moment to moment flow of the truth of what's happening right now. And if sounds, body sensations, thoughts, smells, taste emotions appear, it's helpful to follow this path of a quiet tenderness or kindness for what appears. And noticing visual images or memories or thoughts about what appears based on the past, or a projection into the future. And one just lets that unfold as thinking, planning, remembering, judging. And then you notice if the attention can land with whatever's appearing and changing, more like a butterfly landing. Or sometimes a feeling of being more immersed, fully immersed. Letting the pleasant, unpleasant, neutral flow of Vedana, feeling tone, also as best we can, just letting that unfold naturally, how things are. Including the reactions of confusion or doubt, fear, aversion, attachment, clinging. It's the same process. We see if we can be kind or quietly tender with whatever appears, letting the concepts or visual images come and go by themselves. And then see if we can connect with the truth of what's happening. Just as it appears, receiving directly, not through the thought process. Coming back to whatever anchor is helpful for you, sound, hands or breath, or metta. And finding that rhythm of anchoring, moment to moment, sixth sense door reality as best we can.
Mm. Thank you, Michelle. Mm. Mm. So I am back in Quito, Ecuador. I have a few days of kind of quiet before a bunch of family members of mine from the States come down. Um, I realize I'm not sure how I've really explained what I'm doing in South America to you all. So I'll offer a little bit of context. You know, my dad was from Ecuador, um, and it has been a long time since I've been back. And when we decided to take this sabbatical year, um, I just knew right away it was something that felt important. I had to come down and just visit and um, just reconnect with a bunch of family and stuff that I haven't seen in quite a while in person. And of course, little ones I've never met, and so that felt important. And part of why my mom is coming, who has been to Ecuador before, but then my aunt, who is Ecuadorian, but was actually born in the States, has never been here. Two of her grandkids who've never been here. A niece of mine is coming. She's never been here. Still trying to get my other aunt to come down, who was born here but's never been back. Um, and I just realized like I'm kind of the only one who at this point has like relationships with my cousins and a lot of our family and like places, or my grandparents were born and some connection to that. And I felt like I wanted to, if people were interested, then they should come down while I'm here. So the next few weeks are going to be that for me, um, which should be, I think, I don't know, I'm really looking forward to it. It won't be quiet, uh, but it'll be good. It feels good. Um, I also needed to kind of have a different kind of retreat for myself. I felt like I really was just really thirsty for more solitude and kind of more isolated retreat, and one where I might be able to find someone to cook, where I didn't have to do the cooking. Um, and uh, my cousins here are pretty straight, sort of urban people, and there was no sort of like connection to like where in the kind of country rural area I might kind of find. Um, but the last couple of years since the pandemic, I've started taking online classes, music classes, with an instrument called the charango. It's kind of traditional Andean lute, kind of like a ukulele, but with more strings, a little bit different body, but small. Mm. And my teacher is in Bolivia, in Sucre. And it turned out that he actually did have a place that his wife's cousin has a place out in the country, and they felt like it would be perfect for this. So I was going to go to Bolivia anyway, and study with him and just get to know the country a little bit. And then it turns out that him and his wife were able to like just like to hook me up with this incredible place, this beautiful little cottage, um, about an hour outside of Sucre. Um, so, kind of in the country, rural, but not so far out. That was like mm, scary, you know. Uh, so it's such an interesting question. If you look at the Buddhist teachings, or when we teach our retreat in Chazwa, or we teach retreats at retreat centers, or the last couple of years of, Chazwa in Burma, in the last couple of years, been teaching so much kind of home retreats, for people. Just this question of like how remote, how isolated, how alone, how much in community. Such a powerful kind of range of questions, and I think important things to explore, and not get too rigid about thinking this is the right way or the wrong way. But I think sometimes people would come to the Chazo retreat thinking that they were going to be off in some super remote place, and in fact you find that your experience there is very intimately entwined with the village life, even if you're still very protected in a lot of ways, whether it sounds or all kinds of things, and that there's a richness to that, something really important, and yeah, I found that to be the case, and I think that there's, I'm not sure how much I'll go into it now, but there is something about not being too far from a hospital that always feels good. And for me, there were a lot of like really wonderful and beautiful things on that retreat, but it was difficult physically. I was not well most of the time. I had been sick beforehand, and I have this sort of, my asthma often, I can't remember what it's called, post-viral something, where it's like after a viral infection, my asthma will get really bad, and it can last weeks or months. And plus the altitude, it was about 11,000 feet. And then plus they're going through an extreme drought, as many places are. So there's just this dryness and smoke from fires in the distance that were happening, as they are in many places. So a bunch of factors contributing to there being like a lot of like physical difficulty, to the retreat. But still really beautiful. Okay, I showed a couple pictures last week. Let's see. I want to show some. Let's see. Just a couple. Let's see. For folks who weren't there. So this is my little kuti I had. It's actually inside it was, quite nice tiled floor, but the water was all from it gets kind of, there are pipes that kind of come from different springs in the mountains. A little bit of the view that I had. Sort of some of this forest coming back after many years of being kind of degraded. Still very dry. It's the view up. I'll tell a little more about this direction. These high mountains. So yeah, it was beautiful, it's not really a village even. It's like there's a road. It's like there's a crossroads there. And so cars and buses to kind of go by at different times of the day towards other places. And so they might stop. There's a couple little shops there. People might stop and get water. Anyway, it's like a stopping place on the way, for travelers. Probably only like less than 10 households, only 7 households. So quiet, mostly very rural. I had gone before my retreat, and I can't remember if I've mentioned this or not, but I had gone on a crazy, very long day pilgrimage in the other direction of Bolivia, towards the Oriente, towards the jungle, not in that far, but towards the Amazon side of things, to the place where they killed Che Guevara. he after the Cuban Revolution, I think he found he wasn't a great bureaucrat and was restless to go foment revolution in South America. And so um, members of the Bolivian Communist Party kind of got them this little place in the jungle to start training guerrillas. Anyway, it didn't go well. And they ended up kind of being in this one area for a while and having some relationships with the community where they were helping build and fix people's farms and helping their houses and then other people who were, also rural people who were very suspicious of these guerrillas and fearful of what they might bring upon the area in terms of war. And anyway, they were denounced by another farmer, and so I may say more about that story at some point. But the point of, if you are going to show up somewhere and be like a little weird, a little eccentric, a little out of place, you should at least be more useful than you are eccentric. That felt like a good rule to go by. So, I was, quite quiet and quite isolated, but I really did make decisions about like kind of how to be a little more connected. Because it's like I was having to be yogi plus manager, plus teacher for myself. And the manager is often about the sort of like, what are the relationships with the sort of like external world, So it was fruitful, to also kind of be engaged a little bit with my neighbors and be able to try to help a little bit with just some daily tasks and things like that. At about 12,000 feet, so about an hour's walk up the road, there is a church. The area is called Chataquila, and there's a virgin there, a Virgin Mary, that is very powerful, very kind of well known in the region, really revered. And so a lot of people will come there for pilgrimage, and make offerings and requests of her. And so right at the very beginning of my retreat, it felt important to go up and pay my respects and to ask permission, to be there in a way that felt respectful, knowing that what I was doing was not really the common custom there, that I was going to be doing something different. And that it just felt important to be in good relationship with those beings as well, the spirit beings, and this one in particular, which I didn't know about beforehand. But when I kind of came and they kind of was shown the area, it became very clear that this Virgin of Chataquila is a very important being. And so that place right up there, it's like, that's where she is, right? It's high, and it's where the peaks change. It's where the sun sets. It's where there's still, it's the path, the old Inca trail is still there, which, and of course the Inca trail predates the Incas, of course, or that empire. They used older trails, right, and kind of refurbished them and maintained them. So there's a very ancient pathway that crosses over that mountain ridge right there. That's right at the same spot. There's a very powerful spring, a freshwater spring that's also coming from that place. It's also where this indigenous rebel, Thomas Katari, was killed in an uprising against the Spaniards. It's also where there are storms that come from different directions, but the storms that come from there are ferocious. That's where it's like hail and, incredible winds. The winds that come from there are very incredible. So it is a very powerful place. And this is her. And so there's a common, there's a tradition, a pattern of virgins appearing in stones. And she's one of them. And these are pieces I kind of, I got pieces of this from different places. So this isn't like a coherent iteration of the story, but a farmer in that area at some point was tilling his land. And my understanding is that this stone expressed out to him. I can't remember if it sort of chastised him about something, but it vocalized, and he noticed it and he was shocked. And so he picked it up and he brought it somewhere and he put it down, and he kept tilling his land. And then it said at the end of the day, apparently the stone went back to where it was. When he went to go look for it, it wasn't where he put it. It was back where he was. And so I was told that part of the custom is that if this happens, if you encounter a speaking stone, that you bring it to a curandero, not to a priest. And they'll tell you, if it's real, if this really is an expression of the Madonna, and which virgin is it, right? So I don't know all of the sort of, the different titles and the and names and epithets of the different Marys. Maybe Sister Malia, you could fill us in at some point on how all of that works. I was like, wow, there's like a lot more to this, and I'm gonna like even scratch the surface too. But at some point, a stone will, if it gets acknowledged, will get acknowledged, and then somehow it transitions into also being acknowledged by the church. And so this Mary that I just showed you, this was is installed, next to as part of the same building of the church, but she has her own sanctuary there. And as you can see, people come make offerings, and she is known to be a complicated character. She has a dynamism, that has like incredible benevolence, but also a sharp side, which is not to be crossed, So upon hearing this, it was very clear to me that I needed to go up there before I started my retreat and just make an offering and, ask permission, as we do, anywhere. And it's something that I just, we do it in Hawaii if we're teaching in a new place, or if we're on our own land, or we do it at retreat centers. Sometimes we involve the Sangha. Sometimes it's quieter in the beginning, more kind of personal, individual. It is an interesting, another thing to explore at some point. It's a big part of why when we translated the Metta Sutta into Hawaiian, that was the idea of how to use that, right? Is like to be in good relationship with the spirits of different places that we would teach at or visit throughout the islands. And so I went up and I, offered some of the traditional things that are offered here and there, coca leaves, and I didn't have any alcohol with me, but that is, traditional. Sweet things, chocolates, and down in this part of the world, Palo Santo is usually more of like the incense that's burnt. I brought some of that, but also some sage, also some sweetgrass. You can see in that photograph, to start that conversation of like, yeah, there's something different, right? That there's also to honor the tradition, honor the rights and the customs, but also to start to kind of open that conversation about something different that I'll be doing. And so I sat, for a little while. I made my offering and my candles and just sort of sat for a little while. And, went through the sort of the common thing of just like asking permission to be there and acknowledging again that I knew what I was doing was not the typical custom, but that I didn't mean any kind of disrespect, right? And that I didn't feel like what I was doing was outside of the field either of what I understood to be the tradition and the customs and the qualities of heart, that are intended to be cultivated. And anyway, I kind of fumbled through my my plea, and just sat for a little while. And then very clearly, this voice was like, well, what do you want to do? Show me. And I'll just say that is not that common for me. Like I will like request permission to go to places. And, usually you just sort of like, you do it and you kind of feel like, it's like, does it feel basically good? Or, is there anything very clearly like, no, you're not welcome here? But it tends to be more vague than like, okay, like, what are you going to be doing? And so not expecting that, I made a very quick decision to not bring up Vipassana. And I think I'll just say that it has to do with a lot of these beings, devas, and while this is a Mary, also she's obviously also an older being, right? That this deva on this place has been there for a very long time, and many of these beings, there is a way that Vipassana is focused on like the impermanence of all things, all formations, all conditioned things, is something that sometimes a lot of kind of beings in the spirit world aren't always so open to, because they're not always aware of their own mortality, right? They are often living for eons, and so there's a way that sort of like Vipassana and the insights that come from Vipassana can initially feel like a threat, right? Sometimes. And so I just decided um, to say that I'd be doing the Brahma Viharas, because that feels much more understandable to all beings from all religions, from all, there's a way in which it's like loving kindness and compassion and appreciative joy and equanimity are spiritual qualities, spiritual values that are broadly shared, right? And for many beings, that it's going to, the invitation in the heart towards the goodness of that and the acknowledgement of that and the recognition of that as valuable and as not threatening, felt just more natural. And so I started to go through metta, right? I started to practice a little metta and had this feeling of her feeling into that much more than I could. Compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity. And I tried to, at the end of the equanimity, I tried to sort of sneak in a little of like Vipassana, mindfulness, equanimity, kind of like, but not really. I kind of just went through I had the thought of doing that and I just didn't, right? So I went through them. And then very clearly, it was like, okay, you can do that. And that was it. And so that's what I did. Um, and I wasn't planning on doing a Brahma Vihara, but it felt very clear that was like I now was under an agreement, and I was glad, because I really had not thought of it, but I realized that we have been teaching a form of loving kindness, a form of all of these Brahma Viharas over the last few years, that like we have so much faith in and that we love, and that yet also is different in a lot of ways than the method that is taught by the Theravadan kind of lineage, and what you will kind of get out of the Visuddhimagga. And it was like, oh, we hadn't sent this to the lab. It's like, what is it like to just actually do this, right? That this is going to be, that I'm going to have the space to actually practice these things in a more wholehearted and full-hearted way, in a way that I could really explore them, that I just I hadn't been able to take the time to do since we had started to kind of make this shift. And that there was like this very clear sense of how good this form of practice is and how powerful it is in terms of, and I'll say more about what we're doing in a minute, and how it differs from the kind of method for folks who might not be as familiar, but also the sense of like how to really kind of practice in that way in a deeper way, in a longer amount of time, but also because the tradition has certain expectations of the Brahma Viharas, not just in terms of qualities of heart, but also in terms of concentration, that it felt important to be like, can these fulfill those expectations as well? So it was like, oh, this is actually a wonderful, unexpected opportunity to do this and to check this out. So, just as a reminder for folks who might not be as familiar, the way that it has been taught traditionally for several thousand years, and after the passing of the Buddha, has been around what many people will feel is familiar as like, where we sit down, we pick an object, a primary object of that we are going to direct this quality of mind toward. And we repeat phrases in which we are trying to cultivate this quality of mind towards this person, right? And so, traditionally, there's like starting with ourselves. Sometimes the order has gotten sort of moved around, but with ourselves, going to a benefactor, right? Someone that's very easy for us to feel, we'll just say loving kindness for, moving towards a dear friend, towards a neutral person, towards an enemy, towards all beings. And so we do some version of this with each of the Brahma Viharas. You don't always have to go through the same order. There are ones in which it's helpful to, there's all kinds of technique and method about how it works. But the basic idea of bringing someone to mind, bringing a being to mind from which it's easy to connect with and care for, and may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you be happy, may you know peace, right? Or whatever the phrases that we might use are. And that slowly we build a kind of bridge between this notion of this being and this quality of heart. right? That's caring, that wishes them well. And that over time, that can get very stable, right? Because it's a mental concoction, right? This image of the person or the notion of the person, a notion can be very stable in the mind over time, especially as we're building the sense of care and care, connecting with care, and being distracted and coming back, and so it's taught as a way to build this sort of strength of connection, the stability of connection that can build a very powerful base of concentration. And it also is intended to then move to beings that are harder or more complicated, right? And then to all beings. So this idea that we stabilize it, we stabilize love for where it's easiest, and then we build on that, right? Then we sort of stretch and we build to where it's a little harder, or it's a little more neutral, or it's really difficult, or it's expanded in one way or another. And the idea is like the mind can stabilize at kind of in a wider and wider range of experiences, and that love can go towards difficult beings, or it can go towards all beings. That is, and the same for all of the Brahma Viharas, right? That's the method that was handed down, not the method that the Buddha taught. If you look at the suttas, there was a lot more about kind of radiation, right, in the different quadrants of the mind, actually, or the quadrants of the universe, radiation of loving kindness or compassion in these different directions. So there's still some method, but not a lot. You can see in the chant that we, often do, there's a number of other kind of methods are brought into that, right? Using directions, using all the different types of beings we can imagine, beings in different levels of existence and levels of reality. And so, there's different methods, of course, that we use. What we have been offering over the last few years has been trying to not have it feel so distant from our Vipassana practice, right? Because there's something about that where you're so focused on like a mental experience that you can get kind of disconnected from the body. And then that's actually sort of part of the point of concentration. I'll say that a little more later. But we felt like that we wanted to be able to practice metta, practice compassion, practice appreciation, practice equanimity in a way that was also integrated with the direct experience of the body, with the direct sensory experience of, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting of the mind itself. And so, as Michele offered a little bit today, and, as we've been doing now for some years, of like moving a little bit away from sometimes just like picking an object, a being that you care about and caring about them, and moving towards like, well, when you feel a physical sensation, can you feel a care for that? Is there a tenderness there? Right? When a sound arises, is there a feeling of loving kindness for that? Is there, and what happens when we try to do that? If we're just doing loving kindness, or do we start to find this sort of versatility of mind? Well, if it's a painful sensation, then it maybe has a little more flavor of compassion. If it's a pleasant sensation in the body, oh, there's appreciation, or a pleasant sound, or an unpleasant sound, or pleasant or unpleasant mental experience, emotional experience. This idea that actually anything that happens in the mind, body, heart can be used as fuel, right, to build this sense of being more and more engulfed, and finding experience of loving kindness or the Brahma Viharas that are more all-encompassing, and that don't have to be and that ride this kind of line, between our Vipassana practice and our loving kindness practice, and understanding there's places where they're different, and there's places where they can be very integrated, and taking responsibility for what that might mean, and what are the impacts of that in our practice. the other method that I think we haven't been offering a lot of, because there's no real method to it, but we mention it and we are trying to bring it in, is around something even quieter than that, which is just like feeling kindness. Right. And it doesn't have to be radiated. It doesn't have to be directed to anyone. It doesn't have to be so moving with the winds of experience in our senses either, right? But it's like, can we attune to kindness? And we don't need to send it anywhere. We don't need to receive it, but there's just sort of abiding in it. Metta. Abiding in karuna, mudita, upekkha. And that there is a way of practicing also that is objectless, right? That you don't need to always be that sort of sense of extra effort of like having it to launch out or be directed toward anyone in particular. That there's a softer, kind of quieter approach that's more just still, but that is but that still requires that vitakka vichara, that sort of like bringing the attention to the care, feeling it when it dissipates, bringing it back, right? And this is what we do with the body, or we do with sense experiences. So I got to practice that way, for a month, and it was so wonderful. It was so wonderful to like not to feel like that space to just explore and experiment and to know that you don't have to push, this other idea of like concentration. It's like as soon as that word comes out of our mouths or that notion arises, it's like, right? There's this like kind of clamping down, or kind of mental constipation, right? Of just like to get concentrated. There's just like there's like a dullness, right? That arises sort of in the mind, and then it's like effortful, and then it takes force, and then I just didn't practice that way, but it was like very easeful to just sort of have this like, what was it like to just invite the mind into kindness all the time? And whether it was through this sense door experience of like metta with the 6 sense doors, or the times where it was just metta. It didn't need an object, and it didn't need to be, pushing, striving. That actually it was like the gentleness and the invitation that was an act of kindness in itself that built the concentration, that developed it, that deepened it. Yeah, really, really powerful, really beautiful. And that I feel 100% confident in it at this point. That it's like, yes, it fulfills all of the factors of concentration. It fulfills all of the factors of more importantly, of like the Brahma Viharas themselves, right? These beautiful qualities of heart and mind. And it's such a wonderful way to practice, and that it's a legitimate way to practice in terms of the various outcomes that might be expected, in our tradition and what we're cultivating in the mind. And I think also it really did teach me a lot about why Vipassana is so wonderful. And that it's like, it is amazing that the mind can get concentrated, and that in some ways, like a pure concentration is really designed to start to peel the mind away from the body. It's like this, I don't want to say violent, but it is it is a manipulated force that is different than the way we love to practice Vipassana. And so this sense of like knowing that mind and matter are distinct, that they are different, that they are, materiality and mentality are actually different. They're not one, is so inherent to Vipassana and to the Theravada tradition and to the Buddha's awakening, enlightenment, and the path of development. They are not the same, but they are deeply entwined. And that in Vipassana, we get to like try to understand that. And we try to watch mind and body and the ways that they're interrelated, and that the ways that we see them as distinct doesn't require a ripping of them apart. And the seeing of it, the witnessing of that, the observing it, I mean, that's where the wisdom comes from. And it's so powerful and it's so beautiful. And just concentration, it's not totally divorced from wisdom. It doesn't have to be. But it also doesn't require it on a fundamental level either. And it doesn't necessarily develop it. And so there's a way that you can see that at some point, if you do want the mind to get more concentrated and more stable, you do need to let the wildness of all of the activity of the body and all the activity of the mind and this beautiful way that we practice, there is some part of that where it does need to be let go of. And that mind, that metta itself can become the object, right? Compassion itself becomes the object. And because it's a mental factor and it can appear more stable than all of the ultimately just changingness of the sense doors, that it becomes an object of concentration. And that, the yogis of the tradition, of old and certainly out there still, practices such deep degrees of concentration, which there's no experience of the body at all, right? In the ninth jhana, there's barely any even experience of mind, right? Even there's, perception and non-perception and neither consciousness, it's just like, it's so subtle, right? But it can't last. It takes such force to do that, to peel the mind away from the body, to that degree, that ultimately it's just control, it's just control. And it's amazing that the mind can do that, but it's not sustainable, and it doesn't lead to freedom. The Buddha saw that, very clearly, and it's so amazing, that he was able to integrate these teachings of concentration that were pre-Buddhist. And in some ways I don't think are really, a lot of these pre-Buddhist methods and techniques and knowledges are not really preserved in other traditions, so it's cool that even the Buddhist tradition has preserved something that predates it, even if it isn't the liberated path. And of course, there is also, it's clear why we have to be so careful. I mean, there's many reasons why we have to be careful with trauma, with mental health. But with the concentration, it's like, it's so clear, because this separating of the mind from the body also happens to be something that happens in trauma, right? It also happens to be something that happens in psychosis. And these are not the same things, but you have to see why, of course, why these things can be so evocative in the heart, why we do need to be careful with them. Because if it's happening out of wisdom and carefulness and thoughtfulness with guidance, versus happening out of the mind's only way it feels like it can protect itself from what's happening is by finding that distance right? Away from the body or away from the world, or, whatever's happening, right? The dissociation. It's like, we have to understand that that is why it's so much better to practice Vipassana. Because you're not trying to do that. And we've learned these tools of being very careful that when the concentration gets too weird, or we start to feel like it feels too evocative in the heart, right? Around something that is unsettling, around something that's disturbing, that we know how to come back. That we're like, the point of this is not to rip the mind away from the body. Like, that is not the point of this practice. It's also not to unify the mind and body, which is the point of other practices that we might be familiar with, right? Or to find the inherent unity of these things. It's to understand and to know that, like, we need such carefulness in that process of understanding, right? That we're going to develop concentration in our Vipassana practice, profound concentration, and that we have to understand that there's reasons why the mind is pace with that. Our method is one that is trying to find a healthy pace of that, so that we can do it in a way that is not about recreating trauma or recreating, kind of, really difficult mental mind states, that are very dissociated, right? For whatever reason. It's like really trying to understand that our practice is intended to be so careful with these things, right? And that we bring loving kindness. And it's why our whole approach is about, like, going in when we have the strength, and when we feel overwhelmed and things get really difficult, that we pull back and we go take a walk and we take breaks and we break the concentration. I mean, that's so much of what the method that we offer in terms of pulling back from intensity, not just pushing forward, pulling back, easing back, softening, taking a break. It is about breaking the concentration largely. And of course, bringing in care and all of these things. But it's understanding this tool that we have, and that we know, more and more sort of how to be careful with it. And it's such an inherent part of our teaching and what we're trying to offer in terms of Vipassana. So, okay. Anyway, long story short, I did all this for a while. And at the end of my retreat, I was just like, done with this kind of just control. It's like, these are such beautiful mind states. Equanimity, it's like, oh, it's so wonderful. And I was like, I'm so done with this. It's just like, it takes so much control. And it's just like, yuck, right? It's just reality is better, as crazy it is. So anyway, maybe, like, 5 or 6 days before sort of the end of my retreat, I was just like, okay, I get it. I did, like, I feel like I really was able to, like, explore this, and let's, like, let it go. And it was like such a relief, it's just like, just the messiness of, like, the sound and the body and blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, it was such a relief to just stop this sort of just like pushing this thing, even if it's gentle pushing, even if it's beautiful pushing. It's just like, stop the manipulation and just like, and yeah, it was just really beautiful to just feel like I could come back into all the wildness and uncontrollability of things, and even the badness of it, right? And feel so grateful and such a relief to be out of something that felt so controlled. And so I just felt like, I'm so looking forward to just like, a few, these last days of just practicing Vipassana. And I did have this thought of, like, I am supposed to be practicing the Brahma Vihara. Like, I did make this little agreement. Like, who could argue this? She'll be fine with this. This is, I did it. And then the next morning I woke up and there was no water. I was like, I don't know, and there's a drought, and I know some of the wells go out, but then it was like the whole day there was no water. I was like, oh, okay, Then the next day there was still no water, and so I went to the neighbor, and they were like, yeah, we're gonna go figure this out. So there was like 2 full days of no water, and he came down and he said, yeah, something's wrong. Usually, if this happens, it's because the there's a drought and the tank up the hill just isn't filling, but water is coming into the tank, but it's not filling the tank, and so there's a leak somewhere, and we're gonna find it. So then it's like the third day, it's like there's pickaxes and it's kind of digging up the whole thing, and at the end of the day they're like, oh well, I was like, what happened? It's like, oh, there's a leak under your house. uh, and they're like, it's gonna be a few more days, before we can fix it. And I needed water, I couldn't kind of go on. So I was like, okay. And anyway, so I had to leave. I had to like get it, like figure out an Airbnb in like Sucre for the last, 3 or 4 days of my retreat. But I felt like it was fair, I felt like I went back up to Chataquila, at the end to just like make another offering and apologize. And I don't know, kind of whatever, felt appropriate. And it was powerful. It was beautiful. It was not as much there was not like a kind of clear anything in that as it was in the beginning, but it felt like very beautiful. It didn't feel any kind of negative feeling. But it also felt very clear. It felt very beautiful, this generosity of heart, but no sense, but also like she wasn't going to miss me, like that felt very clear. Whereas like, oh, some of the other people was like, oh, you should stay, don't go, where it was like there was like no sense that it was like I felt like I had permission but not an invitation, you know and I want to show part of how I was sick in the beginning, and then in the middle of my retreat, the family whose house this is, they have a yearly mass that they offer up at the church, and they were like, would you like to come? And it was one of these things where I was like, obviously I need to go. And I got sick again, but it was an interesting service. And on the way up, found this beautiful flower. I took my time kind of going up because they're like, I just walked up instead of drove up with folks. And so I'll tell you first. So I was just walking, and it's so dry. The drought is just awful. But I was walking and I just saw this tiny little red flower on the ground. And I couldn't figure out like where it had fallen from. And then when I looked closer, I realized it hadn't fallen. It was just, it was this. I'm not going to remember the family of this kind of cactus, but it's Rebudia, maybe something like that. There's a few different families, and they're really basically only in Bolivia and in like northern Chile. You can see that's how tiny this thing. Tiny. So beautiful. So yeah, that is how I came up and down from the mountain last month. And yeah, I know I haven't traveled more stories to share. I know that was like a really long talk for our Sunday talks usually. Um, but just felt important to share. Because you never know. Mm, yeah. So there are more threads, of course, and more stories of things outside of that time on retreat. But yeah, really powerful and just really, thank you so much to Michele for holding everything down, and all, of course, um, everyone in the Sangha helped with the Zoom and helped with the downloading the Zooms afterwards and putting them up on YouTube, um, and just for everyone, it's, held things together when one of us is away, or there's times where both of us are away and other, people step forward. It's just, I know that this time that we're taking for ourselves in like these different ways, practical things in our lives and spiritual things in our lives. And, we know that we're not offering a lot of programming right now. And we appreciate the the gift of that from you all, right? The kind of permission to just attend to these other parts of ourselves that we need to attend to. Um, and of course, we're looking forward to coming back into more programming and the ways that starts to build next year. But the time and space has been really important. And I'll just say, for me, of course, there's this side of like, what does it mean to practice, this part of my lineage? Yeah. And so I don't know. I don't know. And yet there's like a lot of learning, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of sort of like, that I do feel like is ultimately not just related to me, right? But of just, yeah, like how are we practicing on our own? How are we practicing in community? What is it like to practice with all of these different sort of elements, cultural elements, individual personal elements, social elements, um, kind of in different configurations, and the different things that we learn, and that it's important, that and part of it is that we can't go back to Burma right now, right? And we're still in this, like, the pandemic happened, and then the coup and civil war now there. It's like there's a lot to be learned about, like, practicing in these different contexts, right? And yeah, just appreciate the time and space and kind of permission and support that I have, that we have to be continuing the exploration. Yeah. So I think that'll do for today, our Sunday Sangha sit. And hopefully we'll see you all next Sunday again. Yeah.
Thank you, Jesse.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week. May you be fortified with the Dhamma.